The use of cannabis for medicinal purposes has sparked debate, with high-profile New Zealanders Martin Crowe and Helen have used the drug for pain relief. It's illegal to possess, use or import cannabis into New Zealand. But the Misuse of Drugs Act has an exemption for people wanting to bring in drugs for medicinal purposes. The law states that a person may bring any controlled drug into New Zealand with them if it's for their own medicinal use and it was legally supplied to them overseas for their treatment and it is no more than 1 month's worth of treatment. So if someone gets a prescription for cannabis oil while overseas, for example, they're allowed to bring a 1 month supply into the country with them for their own personal use, it seems. The drug is already legal for medicinal use in several American states, and both Queensland and Victoria in Australia do expect to legalise it in the next year or so. So if sick people can bring it into the country, why can't they get it here? The Associate Health Minister, Peter Dunne, is with us on the line. Welcome.
Thank you, John. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, nice to be with you too. Are you enjoying this? Because I read something, an interview that Russell Brown did with you in Vice, where you just looked thoroughly between a rock and a hard place, having a miserable time and unable to please anyone.
I'm not having a miserable time, but this is a very difficult issue. And it's a difficult issue for the very simple reason that the game is rapidly moving. And what I've been trying to do is position New Zealand so that when things become a little clearer, we're able to take advantage of what's happening. Now, give you an example. Australia has just made it possible to conduct clinical trials there for the purposes of assessing whether or not certain products can proceed.
Absolutely.
You can do that already in New Zealand. The problem is no one has expressed any interest or desire to do so. So we end up sort of looking as though we're running to catch up, but in actual fact we're no worse off than our colleagues across the Tasman.
Are we running to catch up, or are we just running round and round and round in circles?
No, I don't think we're running round and round in circles.
We are starting to look, aren't we, anachronistic? We're starting to look as if we are out of touch with two things. One, the fact that this drug is a reality in New Zealand life already, full stop. And two, that it does seem to work for people like Helen Kelly and Martin Crowe.
I think we need to make a very clear distinction though, John. We're not talking about leaf cannabis.
I couldn't agree more. Sorry, so you're right. Let's move on. So Helen Kelly and Martin Crowe are saying, actually, this worked for us really well.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not going to talk about particular individual cases. In one case, we don't have the evidence. In another case, the oncologist actually withdrew the application because he didn't think it was necessary to proceed. There are procedures in place which we can go through as to how people can get access to this, and I think the first thing I would say is that people need to talk immediately to their doctors and to seek their advice and their help, because there are steps that can be taken under the Medicines Act. Go back to your introduction. It is, as you say, possible for people to bring in 1 month's supply of any controlled drug for their own treatment, but there are some big caveats on that. It has to be given to them or prescribed to them when they are overseas, so you can't do it by mail order, for instance. And it can only be for 1 month, so you can't get a repeat of it. And the other thing, too, I don't think this is a huge problem in respect of the United States, because there's some doubt there about whether you would actually be able to bring the product out of the United States, because there are federal bans, even though there are state legalisations. So just to finish this very quickly, the real issue for us will be Australia.
Victoria, Queensland, they're looking to legalise, and so all of a sudden the playing field is no longer level, and New Zealanders go back and forth across the Tasman, sometimes in the same day, right?
Yeah, so I think that's unlikely, John, for this reason. It's probably 2 years or so away before any trial results.
Even so, are we simply going to sit here and wait to see what the Australians do?
I'm just going to make the point that if products are approved in Australia, subject to all other things being equal, they will almost certainly be approved for use in New Zealand. So the issue of going back and forward, as you suggest, isn't likely.
So what are you saying? So what are you saying there? Because that seems you seem to be putting a little toe in the water there. So what?
No, what I'm saying is that there are clinical trials that produce viable products in Australia that the Therapeutic Goods Agency approves as being able to be prescribed. It's very likely that MedSafe here would follow suit. We do that in a number of areas where, anyway, we work complementary.
Very likely? Very likely?
I can't judge in advance of what a particular product would be, but it would be my expectation that all other things being equal, that would be the case.
Can I ask you your personal opinion? Do you think that would be appropriate and reasonable and right?
Subject to the normal standards, yes.
Okay, so in fact, this situation, which is now starting to look farcical because you have people self-medicating illegally and everyone is just ignoring the fact, and I suspect 99.9% of the public are just hoping the police never turn up at their homes. So this is a ridiculous state of affairs. You think this may be finite, that this could potentially be resolved by us importing what the Australians are doing within the next couple of years?
Well, whenever the Australians, because they're likely to be first cab off the rank in our part of the world, get approved product, I think it is very likely that that product would be approved for use in New Zealand. I can't prejudge the outcome of those clinical trials. They're about, as I say, 2 years off completion. But I think that would be a very likely step forward. In the meantime, I just want to make this point. I do not expect, and it's not my responsibility anyway, but I do not expect the police or the authorities to be running around persecuting people who are using cannabis sourced illegally.
So the question is, why can't we just let them use it? Why? And in fact, I like to. No, sorry, because that comes back to the leaf and all of that. So let's come back to the exemptions you've granted. How many people have you given permission to use some form of cannabis-based medicine?
I have had one application, and that was the Renton case. And the Renton case I approved.
Okay. Now, Helen Kelly put an application in, but she withdrew it. And my understanding is that her oncologist withdrew it because he felt like he was jumping through so many.
Look,
and in fact, he was being asked to prove efficacy. Well, how on earth can you prove efficacy before you're using the drug?
No, what he was asked to do, as was the clinicians in the Renton case, was to be able to give some evidence that the drug they were seeking to prescribe was likely to be effective for their patient. I mean, a doctor who prescribes something to you for arthritis, for instance, would make that call and would know that this drug would work. So I don't think it's an unreasonable call.
Yeah, but the question is, how does he prove it? I mean,
well, in the Kelly case, the oncologist became convinced that the product that is legally available in New Zealand, Sativex, was sufficient, and at that point he withdrew the application.
Okay, which is confusing because Sativex, my understanding is that it's for spasms and all of that, for convulsions.
Well,
it's not pain relief, right? It's not pain relief, which is what Helen Kelly and Martin Crowe were using cannabis for.
I'm not going to make the clinical judgment. He became satisfied that that was an alternative. Now,
okay.
She chose not to use it, her right. He then at that point said, well, I'm not prepared to proceed with an application.
Okay. Having said that, we've made headway here, which is really exciting. So you think that in 2 years' time, the very real possibility is we will no longer be having this discussion?
I've been saying this for over a year, John, that this is exactly what I think would happen. This would be the course of action. I've also said on several occasions that if manufacturers were to come forward offering or expressing an interest in conducting clinical trials in New Zealand, we would be very supportive of that. But the sad, hard reality is they do not see sufficient market opportunity here. And therefore we have to rely on these tests because we can't put products that are untried, unsafe onto the market. If we do and they fail, we wear the liability. So we have to rely on good test results. The most likely prospects at the moment are those being proposed in Australia, and we're certainly following that very closely. I was in Australia talking to Australian ministers about this last week.